Welcome to the Woman's Current. Is the tide turning? I'm Sylvia Beckerman.
And I'm Molly Wadzeck. Together we're exploring how women support women across generations, experiences, and perspectives.
From baby boomers to millennials and beyond, we're asking, are we lifting each other up? And how do we keep the tide moving forward?
Each week, we'll dive into real conversations with women who are reshaping the currents and reflect on what those stories mean for all of us.
So let's dive in. Let's get started.
All of a sudden, it came home to me that as a mother, that the world that my children were growing up in wasn't safe.
My co-host, Molly Wadzeck, couldn't join us for this conversation, but her voice and perspective are woven in throughout the conversation. Today, we're talking about the intersection of climate, motherhood, and activism, how women are leading some of the most urgent conversations about our planet's future. My guest, Harriet Shugarman, also known as Climate Mama, is an author, speaker, and advocate who helps people turn climate anxiety into meaningful action. Together, we'll explore how women balance fear and hope, how generations can work together for change, and how our personal choices ripple outward to shape the world we leave behind. Harriet, welcome. I am so happy that you could join me today.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, and I'm so happy to get to be here and to speak with you. It's been a while.
It has. So, first off, I want to talk about your origin story, as it's called. You've said that climate work found you through motherhood. Can you take us back to that moment, and was there a specific turning point where concern became action?
Yes, there was. I started working on climate in an international sphere. I was a representative of the International Monetary Fund at the United Nations back in the early 90s. And I was the beginning of the global development of how the world was going to address and deal with the climate crisis, both from mitigation, how we would adapt, the rules we would set on a global agenda. I was part of the developing the materials for the first Earth Summit in 1992. And all of that to say, it felt so far away, the climate crisis, in terms of how it impacted me directly. Of course, it did impact me even then, but it wasn't actually part of my life in that way. We were setting this framework, and there was going to be a lot of follow-up, and I followed for some years at the UN, but I didn't feel that deep connection. And I had small children then, but again, we were working on these big rules. And then in 2000 and, my children were growing, and time passed, and, I watched this move forward. And then I did a training with Al Gore. It was more than 10 years later, actually, 2000, and one of the first trainings that he did, what was then called the Climate Project and now called the Climate Reality Project. And he had a film out at that time, and it's interesting, you age yourself in these things, and it was called An Inconvenient Truth, and it got a lot of information, a lot of publicity at that time. It won an Academy Award. I ask young people now, and I do talk, Sylvia, and most of them have never heard of it, and many haven't heard of former Vice President Al Gore. And anyway, it was a very meaningful time for me. My children were in grade school, and all of a sudden it came home to me that as a mother, that the world that my children were growing up in wasn't safe, and there were things we could do to address the climate crisis, and nobody was talking about it, and nobody was doing anything. And so for me, that was my aha moment, where all of a sudden the work that I was doing on this in a different space came home to be, as a mom, this really will be impactful in my children's lives in a myriad of ways that I can't even identify at the moment, but I know so much so that it will be. And that was the purpose of those trainings, like then and now, go back to your community, talk to your community. So I guess that was for me when it all came home.
Okay. Molly, she wanted to raise something her generation feels deeply. Molly's a millennial. She has three young children, and that is this constant sense of urgency. She said that they grew up watching countdown clocks. Do you think younger generations approach this work differently because of that? And how do we build endurance without burning out?
Yeah, it's so important that we raise those questions, that we talk about them, because there is this underlying feeling that the planet is showing us in so many ways that this is not working for her. What we are doing as human beings in changing the climate, making that happen through our actions. But again, the planet moves at a whole different scale than time moves for us. What we're seeing, though, is that we're seeing these incredible changes in a human lifetime, which is where I think that's coming from. And finally, millennials, Gen Z, they are growing up in many spaces, not everywhere, learning about how fast these changes are happening, what it's going to do in all of our futures, ours, Molly's, her children's. And I think there is that built-in anxiety. And there's a lot when I first started working on climate, both in the 90s and then 2000s, when I said it really started hitting home, we didn't talk about that. It was kind of something you weren't supposed to talk about. Yeah, you were nervous and there was real fear, understanding the ramifications. And again, they're not the same for everybody, right? I live a pretty privileged life in New York City. It's much different than if you're living up in Alaska or Liberia or Zimbabwe, and or different parts of the United States too. But I think to Molly's question, you're not alone having those feelings. We need to talk about them. Understand that through having those conversations, through action, through things we can do, you can actually find your peace in that space. I think it doesn't take away that once your eyes are open and you see what's really happening, you can't shut them. And so it moves different people in different ways. But it's a really important topic to talk about, and we don't talk about it enough.
Right. And the thing is, people say, I'm just one person. What can I really do?
Yeah.
Uh, and that's, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we never know, right? Who are you going to speak to? Who's listening to the show today? Who did Molly meet in the line when she's taking her children, to drop off at their school or daycare? Who knows who? We all have different levers of power. Some of them are bigger than others, and we can just do what we can. But what we're not doing enough is actually talking about what's happening. Catherine Hayhoe, who is a climate scientist, is a real big proponent of we need to talk about it and show our children, we're doing what we can, as much as we can, and we need to ask those that can do more to do more. And then together, right, each ripple ultimately creates a tidal wave. So yeah.
I want to move on to women, motherhood, and climate leadership. And you've called mothers the original climate activists. What do you mean by that?
You know what? Not to take anything away from our male allies, but I've worked in this space now, in the parent climate space, since for more than 20 years, and women are up front and center. And I think, again, do we perceive things differently? Are we with those children and want to create a better future? Not to say their fathers don't either, but I see women stepping forward and leading in this climate movement. One of the organizations I have the honor of working with, where I am the advisory council chair, is called Our Kids Climate. And we are a global network of parent groups, grandparents, parents, caregivers of all kinds. And we're around the world. We have a fellowship program. We are in 50 countries. We have a small grants program that's in more countries. 9 times out of 10, those groups are led by women. And we need to do more research on that. Why is that? Exactly. But that is what we're seeing. That is in that space. So not just in the United States, but globally. And yet in the US, in the climate movement, often you hear male voices. I think the women are the power behind the throne, but they need to also and they're stepping out in front more and taking that leadership. And I think if we had more women leaders in, all roles, that the climate would be a much bigger area of work that we would together be working on to create solutions.
Well, Molly also mentioned that so many people her age want to do better, but feel like sustainability is another test they can't pass. What can women in leadership do to make this work feel more accessible and forgiving and less guilt driven?
Right. I think we just all have to take that guilt off our shoulders, whether we're putting it, on young climate activists, on parents. We are doing the best we can. And, there's this thing called a carbon footprint, that what is your personal carbon footprint? And there's all kinds of calculators, you can figure that out, or your water footprint. That carbon footprint was developed in the late 90s by an oil company, by British Petroleum. Just like we have recycling programs that were started by bottling companies and plastics company, they're trying to put the onus on us. Well, you know what? There are really massive players, the fossil fuel companies, the oil and gas companies in the world. If they became energy companies, renewable energy companies, the tiny footprints that we each have, and some of us have bigger ones than others, and we should do what we can, but the world isn't set up. My mother lives in Western Canada. I'm not going to stop visiting my mom and feel guilty that I flew on an airplane to go see her, because
Right.
otherwise it would take me days to drive. And I don't yet have an electric car. I live in New York City. I don't have, so that guilt has been put on us purposefully, I think almost to paralyze us, as Molly said. And so I think we need to show others we're trying, show our
Right.
kids, we're doing what we can in our home, in our neighborhood. We're taking them when we go vote, because you want to vote for climate champions and people that actually understand and care about this. And so we want to do those things, but we shouldn't be paralyzed because the system isn't set up for us to be perfect. Nobody can be perfect. And if you can, then you're somehow, in a special place where you're given that opportunity, because we can't again. So we need
And
to,
that's
yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
that's very important because we can only do so much, but we have to consciously be in that space. We can't let guilt or any of those feelings stop us from doing whatever we can. And it could just be a small thing, teaching our kids how to recycle, buying sustainable, using paper bags and so on and so forth. We can't, as one person, do it all, but that domino effect and what we could do and the footprint that we could leave to our children, to our grandchildren, if we consciously think about it, it can take place. We can't take it all on by ourselves.
Right. And there are many, you know, households where really just getting the kids to school, getting to work, getting food on the table, those aren't they don't the time and the energy isn't there. And so I think to know that there are others that are working on this when you can't, and doing things, and you're doing the best that you can. But you talk about it with your family, with your kids, with your neighbors. Explain recycling isn't just about keeping the planet clean. Why do we even have containers that are made out of plastic, which is made out of oil and gas, which is contributing to greenhouse gas emissions? So we can learn about those things. We can talk about when we go on public transportation with our kids, why that's good, for many reasons, for social and societal reasons, for pollution reasons. Again, that it lowers our footprint, as you said. So there's so many ways to show that as individuals, and that those individual ways move us to bigger, right? We shouldn't
Exactly.
get stuck there. And so that's part of, all of that too.
So here's another question. How does motherhood change how women think about leadership? Maybe less about power and more about protection.
Possibly, right? I guess we're all individuals, and some of us, maybe it is, feel more powerful as a parent, and more responsible. But I do think that when we and speaking for myself and for a lot of moms in this climate space that I'm with, is that you recognize how vulnerable our children are, right? It isn't until, even when mine are now in their 20s and I still feel protective of them, even though they're out on their own and living in different cities. But what can we do to protect their future? And I truly and firmly believe my children, Molly's, can have a more hopeful future if we take action now. We can't put it into the future because what science is telling us, every degree, every tenth of a degree, so not even a degree is a huge amount, that we can slow down from happening in terms of our warming planet is more years and more hope and more less traumatic changes for our children. So I think that protective nature that comes with motherhood, once you understand what we're facing on what we've done to our planet, and our planet will be fine, right? She's gone through so many changes. She doesn't care about us. She'll spit us out, but it will become more and more difficult for humans on the planet, for other species on the planet in terms of access to clean water, clean air, extreme weather events, etc. So if we can make that a little better for us and our children know that, and then they do that too, hopefully they're going to graduate from school and want to work on this, right? Because whatever job you have, it's a climate job. And everyone sees those connections. So we need to work on those things more too.
You talk about wanting to protect our children. I'm thinking my grandchildren. I have two little
Mm.
grandchildren. One turned 4 today, and the other one's 5 months old. And you
Birthday.
keep yeah, right, and you keep thinking about it. And the one thing we don't want to do is turn that compassion into something where we wind up with burnout. To be able to do it and put it in our lives, but in a way that is sustainable is the word. And we have to be able to sustain what we're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many songs and poems and different references, right? We're sowing winter wheat that other hands will harvest, right? We're planting trees, shade trees that we won't sit under. This is a forever thing, as part of our lives, as parents, then as grandparents, and we want those generations to continue and not have tremendous suffering. And so it's also it feels so urgent, and it is, but our lives feel long, and for us, they, hopefully are in a human time, and so we need to also give ourselves grace, and that means also taking care of ourselves mentally, physically, so we can continue to be spokespeople to work on this in whatever way we find our ways forward. So it's such an important point, Sylvia, that you bring up, and I think sometimes we forget that and we watch as people burn out. We do that ourselves. And we need to also remind our colleagues and friends that if you step out of the limelight or out of the role of doing something for a little while, someone else will step in and it's okay.
Well, that's the whole idea of connectivity and building a community and not taking it all on. We can only do so much ourselves, but that little that we do can affect, and
Yeah.
have that I can't think of the word right now. Contagious. It could be contagious to
Exactly.
everyone
A
there.
good, a good word.
Thank you. Thank you. Word retrieval. So now I'd like to talk about how generations approach urgency and action differently and what can we learn from each other. So, do younger generations bring a new kind of energy or new kinds of fear to this work?
Yeah, they definitely bring a new kind of energy. I actually worked on an intergenerational guide around climate with an organization called the Climate Mental Health Network, and all of their resources are free and online. And I got to work, and I get to do this often, but work with different generations on the climate crisis, but moving solutions forward. And absolutely different ideas come forward, sometimes a different sense of urgency, and we can learn so much across generations, particularly on this. And in the same way we talked about, parents feeling anxious and burnout, young people that tune into this and take on leadership activist roles oftentimes do burn out or get left behind, or somehow they're, this interesting, important spokesperson. I'm from the media perspective. I'm talking about when they're in high school or junior high school, and then they graduate and they go to college, and all of a sudden people aren't hearing them in the same way they did before, and that also is angst provoking too. Or I work with parents who young children, whether elementary, middle school, or high school, their time on this planet is less than ours, right? And so 5 years is a huge amount of time if you're 12 years old or 15 years old. That's a third of your life. And
Yes.
your parents haven't solved the climate crisis by the time, a third of your life is gone. So, it also, so as you said, that anxiousness or urgency even sometimes seems more urgent. And it is. And they need to remind us. I think they do remind us. But we can also remind them too that people have been working on this, and many people take it as seriously and as urgently as they do. And there are ways we can work together and different levers we can pull.
Molly brought up something that I thought was quite interesting, that many in her generation are skeptical of optimism. They want to act, but they've seen too much to believe everything will be fine. How do you define hope in a way that feels real, not naive?
You know what? I wrote a book some years ago called How to Talk to Your Kids About Climate Change,
I
Turning Angst into
remember
Action, and
we
which is
talked about it.
exactly, and that's already 5 years old. But in that book, I talked about different forms of hope. There's hope that the indigenous communities in North America felt when there was no hope. To say that everything is going to be okay is a lie, right? It's
Yeah.
not going to be okay. In the same way that some people, and again, for everybody has different realities, and depending where you were born in the world, where you grow up, your reality may not be the same as yours or mine. For sure it isn't, right? And with the climate crisis, we're going to see more extreme weather. m- You know, we're going to have to develop different kinds of crops to grow, and different regions are going to, by the very nature of just where they are, experience things worse than other areas. But again, back to that point about scientists telling us each tenth of a degree matters, and also telling us too that if we stop burning fossil fuels, huge if, and to Molly's point, right? But that the planet within, 5 to 7 years would reach a balancing point, because our planet is like the Goldilocks planet, right? It is an amazing planet that is searching for equilibrium. And so, that equilibrium, if we stop putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, it doesn't mean that everything's okay and back to what, normal was in like the mid 20th century or something. But then, slowly it begins to change. And so so we can do a lot to create a better future. And I think that is what, for Molly and for many in her, all of us, we need to just remind ourselves too, right? We can't not do this. What's the other option? Putting our heads in the sand and just pretending it's not happening, which we're seeing happening in
Yes.
many circles, not only in our country, but in others. And okay, but that's not stopping anything. And it still is happening, and it will impact different people in different ways, and directly in certain ways, more dramatically than it will others, or how you can recover, et cetera. So that's the reality. Um, so to also not face that, or, our motto at Climate Mama for all of the time we've been here is tell the truth, right? Actions speak louder than words. And then don't be afraid. And that not being afraid part and not having hope, that's really hard, understanding how much, is being put on us not to move forward with solutions. So,
Yep. I fully agree. She also wondered what you've learned about sustaining energy and hope over the long haul, what younger activists might not know yet.
yeah, what I think to that, what we were talking about a little earlier is that, working towards a healthier planet and trying to achieve these goals can't be successful if we aren't healthy mentally and physically, the people that are moving it forward. And so not as you raised before, not feeling guilty if you need to step outside or beside, or if you have celebrate, we need to celebrate important points and moments and create those for our families and our children and our grandchildren. And it's not pretending that what the reality of what's happening isn't happening, but it maybe makes them all that much more sweeter and better that we can be in those moments when we're, you know, taking care of ourselves and celebrating our families and our friends. And so I think just not feeling guilty or not putting guilt on others, and recognizing if someone, if we want to celebrate your granddaughter's birthday, wow, should we ever? That absolutely, she needs to see pictures when she's 14 and 40 that at 4, she was with her grandma and her family and celebrating her birthday. And so we need to create those memories, and we shouldn't feel guilty about it or feel we don't have the time to do it, because no one individual is going to solve the climate crisis. It's something we're going to do together. We're going to slow it down.
Well, I intend to celebrate my grandson's birthday.
Your grandson's birthday. Okay. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we can all take some time out.
Yeah.
What do you wish older women, my generation, older baby boomers, and so on, understood about young activists and vice versa?
Yeah. That we can learn so much from each other, and that we should spend time together. It's important to do that, and to maybe it will remind us, in the elder role, of that energy and hope and drive and determination that we had, and maybe for younger activists to be reminded that this wasn't a problem that just came up for them. We've known about it. We've been working on it. We've been doing what we can, and we can learn so much from each other. I find sometimes that on the, we have some people in this elder side that, like, we tried that, we did that, it didn't work, move on. Well, you know what? There's a time for everything. And
Right.
sometime you need to try it again, and it's going to
Exactly.
work. And so I think that's comes being reminded from younger activists. Well, we're going to do this, and you can say, well, we did that, but you know what? The world wasn't ready for it, or the government wasn't ready, or the company wasn't ready, and now they're maybe ready.
Exactly. And not have that fatalistic attitude. It didn't work before. Well, you know what? Things are different now. Technology
Exactly.
is different. Knowledge is, being able to get information out there is different. So things change. And if we don't adapt, we're going to be living in the dark ages
Yes,
in
agree.
caves where the climate might have been better back then. Who knows? Okay, we're going to talk about hope, account, action, and accountability, which I think is important. And this is from Molly. She says she sees a lot of younger women connecting climate to everything else, from reproductive rights to mental health to economic survival. Do you see that intersectionality approach as a strength? How has it changed the conversation since you began? I have to get the words out of my mouth.
No, such a good question. Molly's really thought through many of these things, and thanks for sharing them, Sylvia. Yes, I do. Nothing, everything's connected, right? I'm a professor. I teach students about climate and about the Sustainable Development Goals. The world came together in 1995 and created, sorry, in 2005. In 2015, I'm losing my mind. Here, time goes. In 2015, and created these special 17 goals. And, you can't solve poverty, provide education for all, address the climate crisis, deal with life underwater. Those are some of the goals, without recognizing one has something to do with the other. And so that importance of intersectionality, if you're working on one, it's going to have an impact on the other. And they go hand in hand. And and it might change how you think about some of those things as well too. So for a young mother, or for someone who's deciding, do I even want to be a mother? Should I be a mother? Knowing what I know about the climate crisis, that's such a deeply personal decision. And it might change over someone's years as they move forward. And, over the course of history, in really traumatic, terrible times, people had children, and that to them was a sign of hope too. And so I think there's, again, that's a very personal decision, that part of, making that decision, but the connection between our clean air, the connection to what our children are learning. I think I had shared that I'm working on this concept of bringing climate education from pre-K through 12th grade in every subject area across grades. Because if we don't learn about these things and learn those interconnections from a very young age, we're living in very politicized times, and this shouldn't be a political issue. The climate is changing because of what we're doing. And we and there's so many intersectional ways of addressing this. So what you're passionate about, do that and it will help address what's happening with the climate crisis.
I so agree. She also wanted to know, how do you balance ambition and responsibility in your own work without letting either one consume you?
Well, that's such an interesting question. Ambition. Yeah. You know what? I think that more and more, because I get to interact with younger women activists, younger moms in this space, we need fresh voices, and we need to understand when to step forward, when to step back, when to step aside. And I think I'm learning that in a better way now. It isn't my voice all the time, or, you know, as we talked about, oh, I tried that or we did that, that I think we need to see things and from a different vantage point, um and that can really help put things into perspective. And that's happened for me.
And finally, she talked about joy as a kind of resistance, a way to stay human in all of this. How do you project joy in your life and activism, and why does it matter?
Yeah, and sometimes they go hand in hand. Joy can be being an activist, being in the streets with tens of
Right.
thousands of people and having so much fun and feeling that energy of what we can all do together, whether it's around climate or what's been happening in our country with people coming together to stand up for democracy and the opportunity and the ability to have free speech and speak about these things. That can bring so much joy and happiness, and they aren't separate. They need to be together, and we have to find joy in our work, and I do that so much. That's what keeps me going, actually, Sylvia, is that the amazing people, the amazing women, men too, but many, many, many women that I get to work with across generations that keep me hopeful, that make me laugh, that allow me to cry when I want to cry, help me keep that joy and happiness, because we need to find a way to hold that at the same time as we hold our grief around this too, be able to move forward.
You've written that hope isn't passive, it's a verb. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, in that way, you know, we need to take on hope. We need to activate it and move us forward in that way. Otherwise, I think we become paralyzed. All the negativity, we can't do this, we aren't going to solve this, we don't have enough time, humans aren't powerful enough. Well, humans created this. We're so powerful that we have put the world out of balance. We've created this crazy situation that we're in now. And so we can together, I think, find a way forward as well too. And if it's not us, then it's our children or our grandchildren, and we need to give them the time to do that. So through our joy, our hope that we can, anyways, that's what I think keeps a lot of people moving forward.
Okay, so that kind of answers what keeps you hopeful. What makes you most impatient?
Yeah. So many. Oh my gosh. You know what? In many ways, and we're keeping it because this should not be a political issue at all. And so I hope your listeners come from all different spaces and places. But we're seeing things put upside down. I am so impatient with the outright lies about the science and the reality about the climate crisis, the hiding of the information, the removal of websites, of data, of information, trying to slow us down. And yet I see in many countries and many spaces, just we're moving forward. We're in a great transition. There's a wonderful philosopher. She passed recently, Joanna Macy, and I would recommend her work to your listeners. And she lived out in Oregon. in the United States. And she talked about that we are in this great turning in the history of human beings. And, we maybe need to walk through the fire to get there, but I'm impatient to get to that next step. I'm impatient to see it. I want to see it. I talked about with those planting those shade trees. Maybe I hope I get to see that we've turned a corner, and I think I will, because I think we can't stop the momentum of where we're going. But it's very frustrating, and I'm impatient with the roadblocks that are being put up to try to slow us down.
I'm going to ask you, where can people find out more information about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I want to share a few of the wonderful projects that I'm working at. So Our Kids Climate, I mentioned.
Hmm.
I'm working on another, and these are ones I'm serving on in an advisory role with Dear Tomorrow, which is a legacy project about writing to um, ourselves, our children, people in the future. We do exhibits, we do workshops, all kinds of things. Wonderful project. In New York State, where I live, I'm working with something called the Climate Resiliency Education Task Force, CREDF. We're working to move climate education forward across our state. Other states are doing it. Um, I'm working something called Climate Junction, which has something called the Ecocyclopedia on the emotions around climate. It's a great resource. It's meant for lay people and people, in the industry. There's something, the Ecocyclopedia part and Climate in Your Mind are two resources that you can find information about how you're feeling about climate and that connection to emotions in a way that is understandable and you can explain to your kids or your grandkids or your neighbors. So those projects, Climate Mama, which I'm the executive director of, is something that is there, although those, it's kind of just there at the moment. Those other projects are active and moving forward. So those are all great places, I think. Thank you for asking, Sylvia.
Harriet, one of the things, and I want to end with this, you work, it's not about guilt, it's about connection. You remind us that caring for the planet is an act of love, not fear. And tying it in, maybe that's what's turning the tide looks like. Women leading, not just with urgency, but with heart. Harriet, I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. Molly will be listening to this, and she and I will be reflecting and talking about this. So I thank you so much.
Thank you and Molly for giving me this opportunity. And I love that you're working together across generations to really remind people of that we need to lead with love and with our hearts. And that is what's changing the world and will change the world. And I think always has. So thank you.
What stayed with you most from Harriet's story? How did her idea of turning fear into connection, how did that land with you?
I think I really appreciated the way that she treats worry as something that's communal and not isolating. It's really easy to get fearful about um, all the things that are really scary. And so it really speaks to me, as a millennial woman who has now this age of like everyone is in therapy. And it's one of the first things that you talk about when you're getting to know someone. We grew up being told to manage our anxiety alone, right? Like, just shut it down, just deal with it, or do like some journaling or go to therapy or do self-care. But I like the way Harriet reframes it as collective care. And I think we saw that during the pandemic too. That's the idea of like mutual aid and collective care where humans really need each other. And her version of activism feels like less like this compulsion and need to save the world and more like saving space for each other inside it, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and that's the thing. And one of the things that we talked about, and of course, what's great about these conversations, even when you're not able to join the conversation, is your input so that it is woven into the conversations. Just a little thing can make a huge difference. We're not here to, as one person, save the world, but we can do our part. And so, you had asked about hope, and she says hope isn't passive, it's action. What does that look like in your life?
I think that Hope to my generation, at least in my experience, it falls flat. The first election I voted in was Obama's first term, right? And there was this, it's all about hope. It's all about hope. And it was a wonderful feeling. It was so exciting. I was living in Harlem at the time, and there was much energy and excitement in the streets when the results were coming in. But it feels also like another internal individualistic thing from that perspective sometimes, how hard it can believe the hope on bad days. Maybe like hope is a verb in the ways that we practice every day unglamorous ways. Like I know if I post something, I know it's not saving the world, right? But like showing up at local meetings, parenting with empathy, raising children who are conscious of social issues and issues that are going to affect them in the future, not in a way that scares them, but that a way that says like you have the power in your everyday actions. I think we've learned to be hopeful in motion and not in theory, especially within our direct communities.
Exactly. Younger women see climate as connected to everything: mental health, motherhood, money. Are we learning to lead in a more integrated way than past generations? What do you think as a millennial?
I think the expansion of it allows us the opportunity to connect and collaborate more with older generations. I know that personally in my life, I really look to the older women who are retired and have the time to kind of bring us in. Like they're the ones helping find the childcare so that the younger women can come to the meetings. It isn't separated from anything else. And I think our generation has really pushed that boulder up the hill with it is intertwined with motherhood, with money, with health, with justice, with belonging. We lead with overlap because our lives are in the overlap. I think maybe that's what makes this movement different from Harriet's generation is that it's a lot about integration, and leadership now isn't about compartmentalizing. It's about connecting those dots between, well, across identity, privilege, care. And the more that women in Harriet's generation and Gen Xers can intertwine with us, right? And see it as connected, the better, because we need that perspective from everyone to make the work really meaningful and impactful.
She started this, right? It was her children who really got her to move in this direction. Because when we think of climate and what are we going to leave our children and our grandchildren, she talks about connecting with the younger generation. She talks about how she was able to integrate everyday life with her children. And that's what grew into everything that she's doing now. How do you see your interaction with your children and where we are now?
The conversations in my household and in the households, a lot of my friends started very early. I have a friend in my community who was like, I think I want to make sure the pollinators in our community are prioritized, right? So she got her kids together. And the kids started their own little committee about like local pollinator gardens. And I think it really starts in small actions from the moment that we have children is just making it a part of everyday life. Like it is a shared community responsibility. This generational collaboration doesn't start like when I reached adulthood and then sought out mentors. It starts from the moment the kids are born. And I'm very lucky to have a group of women and parents around me who have those same values. I imagine it's a lot more difficult for people who don't live in those kind of communities. And it's a lot more difficult for women who have less resources or are struggling way more financially and just trying to keep their heads above water. And I've seen the ways that older women carry a lot of guilt, and the younger generations are carrying urgency because it feels like an emergency. But I think millennials sit somewhere between the two. So I think having, like a little sandwich, right?
Exactly. Sure, things could have, would have, and should have been done, but we're learning and we can't sit back there and go, we didn't do this. It's our fault. We have to move forward and take that guilt away and just talk and do whatever we can. And we started off by small things mean a lot. Talking about what Harriet has has done, what she is putting out there. Where do you think the woman's current fits in connecting these generations?
I think we're a bridge. When I spoke about guilt, I don't always mean that as a negative connotation. I think that some guilt we need to kind of keep in our back pocket to remind us of the mistakes to learn from them. But here in the conversations that we're having between ourselves, between our guests that are from different generations, I think that, yeah, I just see it as a bridge. Like I'm the in between generation that still remembers life before everything went digital. But we're also raising the first kids who will never know the world before climate anxiety. And I think we are supposed to be able to keep both hope and a little bit of the guilt for like a propelling factor and honesty alive. And it's really hard for one generation to hold. So when we are here learning from each other's experiences and perspectives, like that helps build and keep that bridge strong.
Well, one of the things that Harriet reminded us is that the most powerful action can also be the most personal. Sometimes, as we've talked about, leading your family, your circle, or your community, compassion is enough, could be enough to turn the tide. We'll keep digging and finding out. That's it for this episode of The Women's Current. Is the Tide Turning?
If this conversation sparks something in you, we want to hear from you. What's this week's current moment? Tell us on Instagram at The Women's Current. Share it with a friend. And don't forget to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.
Join us each week as we explore how women are supporting each other and where do we go from here.
Until next time, I'm Molly Wadzeck.
And I'm Sylvia Beckerman. Thanks for listening. This has been a Life of Prey production.